So one of the features I added to Mission Control is this automatic updater. So behind the scenes, when I publish and release a new version of Mission Control, if you have the desktop app running, it periodically checks to see, hey, is there a new version available? And if there is, it downloads it, and then you can click a button to basically have it be installed and just relaunch your application, which is what you're going to see right here. So when this is fully done installing, I can click on the restart to install, and that's going to install the new version. Now, I want to show you this. If I go to my settings over here and go to, at the bottom, we are in version 2.9, and we can click restart. Okay, new version is up. If I go to settings again, you'll see I'm now on .30. So the first step of this process is I have the mission control repo. So mission control. And when I push some code up to main, it kicks off a GitHub action, which I can look at over here, to basically build and create the Electron distributions, and it pushes that somewhere. So over here, this is going to build out the 4 different versions. We have the Mac ARM64, we have the Mac 64, Windows x64, and the Linux x64. And once those are all built, it basically creates and publishes a record to my database, which is then displayed inside of agentsystem.dev/download. So all of these versions are coming from the database, and then the actual binaries are hosted on an R2 bucket, which when you click download, it just fetches from that bucket, and then you can install it on your computer. So if I go back to the diagram over here, I'm going to go ahead and just put me as a user. I'm a developer over here, developer, and I'm going to go ahead and just push some code up to main. Maybe there's a new feature that I want. And I do also have a release skill that I run, which is going to basically tag a release. So for example, if I make some code changes on main and then I want to go ahead and get that deployed out, I may just go ahead and tag a release. The GitHub action is looking for tags, right? That's kind of how it's set up. And if I go to the actual actions, I have like a YAML file that has the release. And then I can scroll through and you'll see up here, it says on push the tag, basically run this workflow that does all that work. Okay, this is a GitHub action YAML file, and this is how you can define these things automatically when people tag releases or just push the main, etc. I'm sure you've seen those. So right now it's a manual process. When I want to make a new release, I literally just go over to mission control. I'll load up a new terminal, and I'll just say like /release, right? And that runs my release skill, which will go through my package JSONs. It'll bump up some minor or major or patch versions, and then it creates a tag, and then it pushes that, all that fun stuff. It's all automated. I don't want to have to actually do any of this stuff manually. And then when that's done, I push that to an R2 bucket. Let me just go ahead and do an S3 bucket. It's technically an R2 bucket because I like using Cloudflare. And then that is going to store the artifacts, all 4 of them, inside of that R2 bucket, which is inside of the, I'll say like the academy is what I've been calling it. But it's also just agentsystem.dev. So maybe I should say agentsystem.dev. This is the ecosystem that has the R2 bucket. It also has a database. So let me add in like a Postgres database over here, which has a release table. Okay, so this, not only does it push to the R2 buckets, the artifacts when they're all successfully built, it also creates a release. So I'm going to say create release record, and that's just going to basically be version 0.31. And then it also is going to link those to release artifacts. So there's 2 tables. There's a release table and a release assets table. And those are mapped one to many. You can have one release have many different assets or artifacts. And then I'll just go ahead and say like create asset for each OS version. So that's how that's kind of working. And when you go to this page, all that's doing is just loading up a page that fetches the release versions. And then when you try to download, it's just going to download that directly to your computer. So you'll have to kind of do that when you first install Mission Control. But once you have it installed, the Electron app is periodically checking my Academy endpoint to see if there's a new version. So there's an endpoint over here to basically check to see what is the latest version. What is latest version of Mission Control? And then also inside the Electron app, there's like a hard-coded string when I do a build, so it knows what current version it's on. So if the version is different, if there's a newest version available, then we show that button that's up here, which allows them to click to download the latest version, and then they can click it to restart to install. Now, one thing I didn't mention is that when this build is happening, we do publish a YAML file that looks kind of like this, that kind of specifies what is the latest version of all of these Electron apps. So this is the YAML file and what it kind of looks like, and we can download that by just going to this URL. So if I go ahead and grab this, I'll paste this in. This is the endpoint where if you go to, you can then download the latest YAML file, and that's also what Mission Control is grabbing to figure out what version it could potentially need to update to. Now, when it comes to Electron apps, there's a built-in auto updater. So a lot of this logic that I'm talking about is just built into Electron. As long as you have the right endpoint and you have the right binaries that are signed, that are deployed out to the R2 bucket, Electron can see that and automatically just download it and install it and update your current version. Okay, so I didn't really have to write much of the logic to do the auto updating stuff. All I had to do is just show a button. When I click it, it kind of kicks off that whole workflow. Now, the main thing to talk about is when a user actually clicks on this button, going to kick off an IPC call. So basically user clicks restart, and that's step 5. There's some additional stuff that goes on behind the scenes. Honestly, I can talk about it. I have a complex diagram that explains exactly what I'm talking about right now, but I think doing it live and kind of explaining it is much more useful. So when they press restart, that calls an IPC channel. So if I go to my app, go to mission control, IPC, and we can look at the IPC channel. We have update, check, download, install. Basically, these are what the UI calls into, and Electron's going to run some functions when those basically get called. So let's go and look at the auto updater. So when the user clicks that button, it's going to call trigger update install at some point, which gets the updater. This is just built into Electron. So if you look over here, there's a get updater, and it's getting window.electron API. It's trying to make sure updater is there, and then it returns it. So again, the auto updater I talked about built into Electron. All you have to do is call it and just say install now. And like I mentioned, the actual download behind the scenes, that's coming from the Electron auto updater. Like I didn't have to write that logic. It just automatically looks for a new version. When it finds it, it'll download it. And then to actually trigger the update, you have to actually run this function. Okay. And that is at a high level how it works. Now I am going to do you guys a favor. I'm going to go ahead and just dive through the actual diagram. This is what I asked Claude Code to generate a mermaid diagram that explains exactly how all this stuff kind of works. It's a lot more intricate, it's a lot more nuanced, and I do think just kind of covering it is useful. One thing that I found to do all the time when you're dealing with AI, if you let AI design your system and build out features, you should probably just ask it for a diagram. You should spend 5, 10, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, it depends on how good you are, to review it so you have a high level understanding of what it's doing, right? Because at every seam of your system, there are potential issues with security you need to kind of keep in track. And if you don't review this stuff, you're just going to kind of blindly let that stuff fly by the wayside, and it's going to end up causing you issues down the road. So having a good holistic understanding of how this stuff works, I highly recommend. So I'm going to go through this again. This will take much longer. This will be much more thorough, but this is what people seem like they liked watching when I did YouTube a year or two ago. So let's just kind of go through this and we can kind of understand what's going on. Okay, so when we run a release, this is the GitHub flow that I kind of talked about. It's kind of doing the resolve refs in notes, prepare release records, and then the matrix build over here, right? So we're going to go and just kind of skip these things because they're kind of just like setting up the pipeline to be able to start building. And then it runs the matrix build, which you'll see is basically just running an Electron build for all those. I think it might be worth going and looking at the YAML file for this, and we can kind of see what the matrix is doing. So let's go to the matrix down here, and you'll see that it basically includes these 4 operating systems, and it's going to run Electron with these builder flags. So Linux, Mac, whatever. I think these are potentially used down here if I were to find where this is actually invoked. Okay, down here is where it actually runs the Electron builder with those flags. Okay, so again, it's a matrix build. It runs those 4 things, and then it stages them and it uploads the manifest. But eventually, it's going to come down here. It's going to publish them to my Academy R2 bucket. So the way this works is I gave a API key to my GitHub action for mission control, so it has access to push to a secure endpoint that only a person with the key could use to update these files, right? So we have the mission control release key. This is what kind of gives it permission to push those files, and then it just goes through for every build and it pushes that over. And you can see that over here, publish release is going to call the Academy application down here. We have a post endpoint where we can post these releases, and then we can also finalize them, and we can also get the releases like this. It's storing it into the R2 bucket. It's also storing it into, they didn't really display a database over here, but just assume that there is a database. And then we have these endpoints for getting, which I'll kind of talk about in a bit. So again, that's the same process that I kind of talked about here. It's just a little bit more detailed. Okay, so stop the video at any point if you want to read through this and try to understand it. And then eventually when it gets finalized, so all 4 of them have to finish building successfully, and then it calls finalize, which means that it will then be marked as ready and it'll show up inside of the mission control page here, right? If it's not finalized, these will not show up. Now, in terms of building up the Electron app, there are some native binaries. So like we have SQLite 3, we have Node PTY. These things actually have to be built on the actual machine that's building the Electron app. And so that does take some time to build those, to get the node dependencies all set up. And then it runs the Electron builder, which gives us the distributions. And then we kind of upload those like we mentioned during this process. I think this is like a snapshot of this over here. Okay. And then eventually it gets into this, right? Okay, going back to the mission control view, this is kind of what I talked about. It has a built-in auto updater. So every 10 seconds, when it first loads, it checks to see if there's a new version. And then it also checks every 6 hours, I guess, to see if there's a new version. It auto downloads when the new version is available, and it auto installs when the app quits. And then we have like an update manager that actually just checks to see if what stage is kind of happening. And I think this is used for showing the status of the button in the top right. So depending on if it's currently updating or downloading, we get that from the IPC channel from Electron itself, and then we can kind of use that information to display on the buttons. Now I mentioned the IPC channel over here. Again, those are just calls that call directly into Electron for installing the latest version so that you can have the app just basically restart. And then in the React UI, there are some components for basically displaying this stuff. So over here, there's a query that runs every hour to pull for the releases. And then if it does find a new release that's different from the current version, again, there's a version that's baked into the Electron app. If the version is different, it's going to show the update available button, which if you click it, it'll basically start downloading for you, or, the auto updater could potentially start downloading when you load up the app. Those are two potential scenarios. And then we also have the sync store. So that's kind of used for syncing up the state of the download and the update to the button, like I mentioned before. And this is all on the general settings page. Okay. There's also some stuff over here for skills. I need to actually delete this stuff. So it's also good to make diagrams of your system, because when you do that, it helps you identify things that are like code rot. This is old. I need to get rid of this. I used to have the skills that I talked about be installed from a button because I wanted to like make them cost money. I wanted to charge for them. But now the skills are open source at MIT, and you can actually check them out or download them up here. Just go to product skills, totally free. They're on GitHub, MIT license, do what you want with it. I use these all the time. And this is exactly what I've been using to build out mission control. All this, I didn't design any of this. This is all AI. All of the implementation, again, this is just GPT 5.5 or Opus 4.7. But understanding how this works is the critical part. As a senior engineer, you need to understand the system from a holistic level and not necessarily the nitty-gritty stuff that's inside, right? At some point, it is kind of necessary to learn this stuff, but every single line of code in mission control was written by AI. I haven't written a single line of code to build this out. So hope you guys enjoy. Go check out Mission Control if you want a really cool application for doing your agentic development environment. There is a free light version. You can have up to 2 projects, right? 2 projects. If you want another project, you do have to upgrade to the pro version. But there are still a little bit of kinks I'm trying to work out. So definitely join the Discord if you want to give me some feedback. Again, go to agentsystem.dev, go to community. Here is the Discord link. Join. You can talk to me directly. You can give me feedback. You can say I'm an idiot. It doesn't matter. Just come and join the community, be part of it. I'm definitely eager to have you guys join in. We can actually have good engineers communicating with each other. Other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm going to try to get back to doing more diagramming videos because I do think that's something that a lot of people originally subscribed to my channel for, and I will admit I have been lacking on doing these, but I do think they're very important. I will just say that most of the stuff now, it's going to be me using AI to build a system, me analyzing the schematics and the diagrams, and then me breaking it down for you all so it kind of makes a little bit more sense. But yeah, I mean, we reached the age now where like AI can literally design all of this. It's crazy. Anyway, have a good day. Happy coding.